Okay, so picture this. A revolution has just taken down an empire that's been around for centuries. The very next day, the new government starts pumping out laws. And we're not talking about small reforms here. They're trying to completely erase the past and build a brand new world from the ground up. This wasn't just a simple change in leadership. It was a blueprint for an entirely new reality. We're going to dive into the first super radical decrees of Soviet power right after the 1917 Russian Revolution. Just let that number sink in for a second. Over 950 laws in just 9 months. That's not gradual change. That's an absolute avalanche of legislation. And the speed? That was totally intentional. They were in a race against time, trying to lock in their power and make the revolution permanent before any opposition could get organized. They were trying to fundamentally rewire an entire country, from its economy all the way down to your personal daily life. So, okay, a ton of laws. But what did they actually do? How do you use just ink on paper to tear down an old world and build a new one from scratch? That's the big question we're going to tackle here, step by radical step. To really get why these new laws were so extreme, you first have to understand the world they were designed to destroy. For millions and millions of Russians, the biggest problem, the one that overshadowed everything, was land. The whole Tsarist Empire was basically built on top of a completely broken farming system. Get this. Even long after serfdom was technically abolished, most peasants still didn't own their own land. Instead, they were stuck in something called the peasant commune. The land was all held collectively, it got redistributed every so often, and you couldn't just pack up and leave or sell your little plot. It was a system that pretty much killed any personal ambition and kept people trapped, often buried in communal debt. Now, the government did try to fix this. A prime minister named Pyotr Stolypin brought in some reforms to let peasants opt out of the commune. But honestly, for most people, it was way too little, way too late. They were still tied down by debt, they had very few legal rights, and they were stuck farming these tiny, inefficient strips of land. The whole thing was a powder keg just waiting to blow. And then, boom. That explosion happens in October 1917. The Bolsheviks take over, and they immediately put out 3 decrees that became the absolute pillars of their revolution. They were super direct, really simple, and they went straight at the 3 biggest demands of the people: peace, land, and power. First up, the decree on peace. You've got to remember, Russia was just being bled dry by World War I. Millions were dead. This decree was a direct promise to every soldier in the trenches, every family back home. This slaughter is over, now. It was this incredibly powerful signal that the new government's #1 priority was to just stop the war machine. Second, the decree on land. And this is the one that really flipped centuries of Russian society on its head. In one sentence, it just wiped out the entire concept of aristocratic land ownership. Think about that power shift for a second. All the land that belonged to the rich nobles, the royal family, the church, seized. No payment. It was now the property of the people, to be managed by local committees. The foundation of the old world? Gone. Just like that. And third, the decree on power. This one made it official. The old government was history. All authority was now in the hands of the Soviets, these councils of workers, soldiers, and peasants that had popped up all over the country. This was the new legal basis for the state. All right, so with those big political moves out of the way, the Bolsheviks turned their attention to the economy. Their goal was nothing less than to completely dismantle capitalism, and they did it with a series of really fast, really calculated decrees. And this wasn't just random smashing, It was a logical, step-by-step takeover. Step 1, workers' control. This law gave factory committees the power to oversee management and, this is the key part, to open up all the company's financial books. All of a sudden, there were no more commercial secrets. Step 2, nationalize the banks. Banking becomes a state monopoly. All the private banks just get swallowed up by one big state bank. That gives the government total control over all the money. And then the final blow, step 3, annul the debts. They just declared that all the massive state loans from the old regimes were null and void. The financial slate was wiped clean. The main takeaway here is that this wasn't chaos. Each decree was like a gear in a much larger machine. The ultimate goal was to surgically remove the engine of the old capitalist system, private property, private banking, private profit, and just replace it with a centralized economy that was run entirely by the state. But hey, the revolution wasn't just about economics and politics. The decrees were meant to forge a totally new kind of society, and they reached into the most personal parts of people's lives, from your social class to how your family was structured. And this is where the ambition just gets staggering. Yeah, and this book cover here really drives that home. This whole legal project wasn't just about who owns the land or the banks. The decrees were designed to reach into every single corner of life: marriage, divorce, school, you name it. Nothing was supposed to be left untouched. I mean, just look at this list of social revolutions. And each one was just a single decree. One decree got rid of all social classes and titles. No more princes, no more nobles. Overnight. Another one separated church and state and seized all the church's property. They legalized civil marriage and made getting a divorce unbelievably easy. And, on paper at least, they established full legal equality for women. Every single one of these was a massive shock to the system. These weren't just reforms, they were like legal earthquakes. Put them all together, and what you have is a deliberate attempt to literally decree a new social reality into existence by erasing the legal foundations of the old world's power: the aristocracy, the church, and the traditional family. So after months of this non-stop, rapid-fire lawmaking, it was time to pull it all together. All these individual decrees, they had to be woven into a single, official blueprint for the new country. And that became the first Soviet Constitution of 1918. And this table tells you everything you need to know. This wasn't a constitution about universal rights for everyone. No, this was an explicitly class-based document. Look at the left side. Power goes to workers, soldiers, and peasants. Now look at the right. Power is specifically taken away from anyone they considered a class enemy, people who hired others for profit. Priests, former cops. Power wasn't just defined by who was in, but by who was very deliberately kicked out. And this quote right from the Constitution itself just wraps the whole project up with a bow. It officially declared Russia a free socialist society of all the working people. It was the final official statement. The old world is dead, and a new one, based on the power of the working class, is now the law of the land. It's hard to wrap your head around the sheer scale and speed of all this. With over 950 decrees, an entire social, political, and economic system was taken apart and replaced in less than a year. It was probably the most ambitious legal project in modern history. Which, of course, leaves us with one last big question. When you tear down an old world that completely and that fast, what guarantees the new one you're building will actually be any better?